Things and say hello to the folks who are online with us. Want you to know, Andy, that there are a lot of us here sending you good energy for your healing, and to Jenny's family, and also to the two committee members who are on with us. Dr. Len Fleischner, who is a professor of education at Keene State, New Hampshire. He's a scholar of wilderness rites of passage and shadow work. And Dr. Celeste Snowberg, who is an arts-based research expert and works in embodied forms of inquiry. She's a professor of arts education at Simon Fraser University. And also Jenny's external reader, who is a previous keynote of ours, and one of Jenny's participants is our keynote this weekend, so thank you for that. Dr. David Greenwood of Lakewood University. He's the director of the Center for Place and Sustainability Studies. So you may remember when I introduced my dissertation proposal students the other day that I mentioned that students wanted the introduction to focus on relationship. Well, with Jenny, the relationship is her work. And she's taken us into an amazing journey, her committee members and her mentors, of being and connectedness. And I want to just describe a little bit of it. In her second year, she jumped right into narrative and arts-based inquiry, which you're going to hear about. She looked at diversity and connecting with the other being all forms of life. She started studying, she started studying this way before she got to us, but she did her doctoral studies on breath and body work in sustainable education, focusing on embodiment psychology, and she got her first committee member, Celeste Snowberg, on board. She also looked at the connection of embodiment to environmental ethics. In her second semester, she went into some deep inquiry into darkness and the constructs of darkness. And she worked with Molly, her cohort member, to do a study of abundance and leadership in the context of Molly's work in Michigan. She also took on Celtic wisdom. About that time, she got very engaged with her second committee member, Len Fleischer, studying shadow. And Len points out that this is really where she began an important and groundbreaking process of connecting the literature on the psychology of the constructs of darkness to darkness and shadow work, to her own creative and courageous experience through the perspective of her participants and herself. And then in her her third year, she started applying it all. And she began presenting workshops where she connected with David Greenwood, doing some of her workshops. Her final year is about, I keep skipping, poetics of vulnerability. And I wanted to share what Celeste said. I believe it is her capacity to go into the territory of her own vulnerability with courage, which has allowed her to write from the depths. So she's going to share about her fourth year and the work that she did courageously writing from the depths. Okay,
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in and coming up. It helps me because I do feel really vulnerable. It's a vulnerable thing to share what is important to me and then to be seen. So having a tighter container is helpful. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to be talking to you this afternoon about befriending the darkness. This was a creative exploration of the shadow. The shadow. The shadow is dark. The shadow is dark. So I thought because we are talking about befriending the darkness, we might want to start in the dark. So we're already a little darker, and we can get even darker just by closing our eyes. So I invite you, if you're willing, to feel your feet on the ground and to gently close your eyes. So the moment you close your eyes, you're in the dark. You're in the dark of your own inner landscape. The first two things I like to do in the dark of any kind, inside and out, is really feel my feet on the ground. Both feet, firmly planted on the earth. And then I like to start paying attention to my breathing. My feet and my breath are my guideposts in darker territory. So notice what the landscape within you is like. We've had our eyes open a lot today, hearing beautiful things, seeing beautiful things, and now just taking a few moments to honor the dark by closing our eyes and noticing what lives within you. So as you breathe into the unknown, keeping your eyes gently closed, I invite you to hear these words that describe beautifully the transformative power of the dark.
Rima Rakanaka. Kana chiso chako chakaneta, nenyika yakanetao. Kana kuona kwako kwarasika, hapana dini renyika rinogona kukuona. Yava nguva yekupinda mudima, dima rine maziso, dima rinoziva waro. Mudima unowana rudo ruzere, dima richava musha wako nasi. Usiku uchakupa tariro, unofanira kudzidza chinhu chimwe. Nyika yakasikwa kuti iwe yakasununguka. Siyana nedzimwe nyika, kusara yako yawakasikirwa. Dzimwe nguva zvinotora dima nekutapira kwekuva wega kuti udzidze kuti chese chiro kana munhu wese wese asingakupe upenyu muduku duku kwazvo kwauri.
Sweet darkness. When your eyes are tired, the world is tired also. When your vision is gone, no part of the world can find you. Time to go into the dark, where the night has eyes to recognize its own. There you can be sure you are not beyond love. The dark will be your home tonight. The night will give you a horizon further than you can see. You must learn one thing. The world was made to be free in. Give up all other worlds except the one to which you belong. Sometimes it takes the darkness and the sweet confinement of your aloneness to know that anyone or anything that does not bring you alive is too small for you. Begin to deepen your breathing, feeling your feet planted on the ground. When you're ready, I invite you to begin gently opening your eyes. Those words are from the poet, the Welsh poet David Whyte. The American poet, Theodore Roethke, says the dark has its own light. The dark has its own light. When my son was a little boy, he was about 5 or 6 years old, he had a nightmare. I asked him if I could tell this story to you all, and he said I could. So, hi Andrew, thanks. He had a nightmare, and I went into his room, and he was upset, and he was shaking, and I asked him what happened, what was going on, and he said, Mommy, I was running and running in the dark, and there was a giant praying mantis chasing me. And I didn't know what he wanted. And I said, okay, so after some comforting, after some nurturing, I said, would you be willing to go back into the dark? Would you be willing to go back and meet this praying mantis? And after some, oh my God, I don't know, he agreed to go back in. And so he closed his eyes, and he said, I see it, I'm running, I'm in the dark, I see the praying mantis. And I said, stop, right where you are, stop running. Turn and face the praying mantis and ask him what he wants. And so he stopped, and he turned, and he asked the praying mantis what he wants, and when my son opened his eyes, he said, "Mommy, he just wants to be friends. He just wants to be friends." So when I face what is difficult, and I don't go on the run from what scares me, from that giant, we all know these giant praying mantises, right, inside of ourselves. It's so easy to run. Believe me, I spent a good, solid, probably 10 years running, and I still run, but I mean, I was really, really on the run. And when I run from difficulty, I feel disempowered, disconnected from myself. But when I stand and face the praying mantis, I stand on more solid ground. I stand on solid ground when I allow myself to experience the whole of who I am. So the question I explored in this research is this: how does facing the shadow, and the shadow really is the places within us that we're unfamiliar with, that we don't know that well, and therefore when we confront them or we face them, it's difficult at best, uncomfortable at best. Sometimes it can be terrifying. For those of you who have stood and faced your praying mantis, you know what I'm saying, that these feelings can be very intense. So I wonder, how does facing the shadow affect my relationship to myself and the world around me? That was the question that emerged after quite a lot of other questions. That's the question that I landed on. And I explored this question through story, through my own story, and through the story of 6 teachers. Melanie is one of them. Melanie was one of the people I interviewed. And these are teachers who guide others towards their difficulty in really creative, interesting, and courageous ways. And they do this, we do this, guiding others towards their difficulty, because we know that showing up for it all is really, that is the art of living a wholehearted life, to be able to show up for it all. And we know the empowerment and the connection that comes from that. So how I chose the teachers was a really intuitive process, really intuitive process. Each teacher I spoke with, I felt like I was meant to be talking to them when I was talking to them. I had these experiences in my body, like the hair standing on end and my heart beating faster. I would cry. There were moments that were just palpable with transformation and alchemy, just these moments where I was wide awake and they were too. So it really was intuitive. I just knew I was meant to be talking to them. They also are incredibly well established in their fields. They are deeply inspiring. And they also know from personal experience first, but then professionally too, guiding others. They know the power of facing the shadow really deeply. It's in their bones. So I want to just quickly introduce you to them, just give you a little sketch. Melissa, who I don't think can watch today, but she was one of my teachers. She helped me dance back to myself. She dances with young people globally, all over the world, and she's been doing it for decades. She is a force for wholeness. Jessica is a yogi. She lives in Black Forest, Colorado, and she reminds other people of their beauty simply by remembering her own, having the courage to remember her own through the study of yoga. Her passion for truth is it's palpable, and the word she used most in her interview was fire. And Carl teaches at a university in British Columbia. He is incredibly inspiring. He never sacrifices one iota of his heart and soul in his writing. He's an academic, and much of his work informed the way that I wrote my dissertation. It gave me the courage, actually, to write in the way that I did, which was more of a revealing way. And Melanie's voice, as you've already experienced here, has been amazing. Such a gift. I mean, such a gift to have her here for so many reasons. Her voice and her heart moves mountains. Mountains of racism, of fear, of disconnection, and scarcity. As you've witnessed here, her vibrancy for life is palpable and her compassion runs deep. Manulani is an indigenous epistemologist. She teaches at a university in Hawaii, but she's on a Fulbright situation in New Zealand right now. And she's rooted in the Hawaiian land, and she loves the Hawaiian land, and she relies deeply on the words and wisdom of her ancestors. She encourages a holistic way of knowing that requires bold and determined choices to face the truth in your life. Lauren, finally, is also works within academia, and she's also a wilderness rites of passage guide. And she's called to reweave the connection between human beings and the natural world, and everything she does, whether she's out in the woods or she's in her office, is in service to that call. So I interviewed each of these teachers, and it ended up being more of a conversation, really, about what it means to face the shadow and how that affected them doing that, continuing to do. We're always doing that if we choose. How it has affected them to face the unknown in themselves, and how it affects those they guide. So I embarked on this journey with the supportive and heuristic framework. Big word. Really, the root of it means to discover or to find. And what I loved about this framework most is that it considered the researcher, me, and those I was talking with as co-researchers, as people really looking at this together and wondering about this together. And I also felt the deep support of indigenous scholarship, particularly that of Celtic wisdom, that sees the darkness as the site of transformation. All we have to do is think about, this is where all life is born from darkness. And indigenous wisdom of all kinds knows that, honors that. So I felt completely bolstered and supported by that. And then finally, narrative inquiry, autoethnography, and arts-based inquiry, really seeing stories as personal stories and the stories of others as data. So the literature I reviewed for this study, I need a little sip of water. The literature I reviewed in the study included the work in the area of shadow, and I need a tissue. Does anyone have a tissue? So work in the area of shadow, particularly Carl Jung and Connie Zweig, who define the shadow as places within us that are unknown. And because they're unknown, many of us have been not taught to navigate the unknown. I'm going to talk about that a little later. Thank you, friend. Just need a little. And because we haven't been taught to navigate the unknown, it can be scary. It can be scary. I'll just leave it at that. I also looked at the work in the area of deconstructing darkness. So looking at scholars who are talking about the physical dark, spiritual dark, and the psychic dark. And that was really powerful and interesting. And then also looking at the literature in the area of what it means to live a wholehearted life. So particularly Brene Brown, I don't know if any of you are familiar with her work. Her work is really hot right now because of her TED Talk on the power of vulnerability. And I felt so grateful for her work as I navigated this. I felt like she was right there with me. And the poet David Whyte, who writes beautifully about living a wholehearted life. So when I looked at darkness, or when I looked at shadow in the face, I found what Theodore Roethke found, that the dark has its own life. What I thought was going to be this big treatise on the shadow, pages and pages about defining the shadow, actually turned into a treatise on the art of living a wholehearted life. So I'm gonna break that down just for a second, because that was probably the biggest transformative moment for me, was what began as a study of the shadow turned into a deconstruction and reconstruction of the darkness, and then turned into a treatise, pretty much, it felt like a treatise, on wholehearted living. So shadow leads to wholehearted living. Facing the shadow, wholeness. Dark has its own light. So what I realized from that is they're intertwined. They're not separate. The dark is not separate from the light. The light is not separate from the dark. And in realizing that, before I could dive into anything else, I had to look at my relationship to the darkness. I had to really look at it. And I studied it. I live in the Blue Ridge Mountains now, and it gets really dark out there. And I was studying it even in the middle of the night when I'd get up to go to the bathroom. Rather than turn on the light, I would keep the light off and see how I moved through the dark. And just like you did so bravely a few minutes ago going into your own darkness, I used the same skills, actually. So as I spoke with these teachers about the shadow, we couldn't help but talk about the dark, because the shadow is dark in nature. So I started thinking, how do I relate to the dark? How do I navigate the dark inside of myself? How do I experience the physical dark? How do I use the word dark? And how do other people use the word dark? That has been really interesting. And then I also had to consider how I relate to darkness on the outside, like darker skin. How do I relate to darker skin and to the dark earth itself? Getting into this territory was terribly scary for me. I really wanted to keep it to the psychic inner dark and not get into the confusions out here that we all know so well. I was having to check my own identity, and I was having to see my own place and privilege where race inequality is concerned. At one point I said to my committee member, Len, thank you, Len, I said, I really don't want to go here. I remember exactly where I was sitting. We were all on a call, and I said, I just don't want to go into, like the darkness is fine, but I don't want like black and white or, race and inequality and oppression. I just didn't want to go there. And Len said to me, I think it's too late. I think you're already in it. So words like race and privilege, white, black, oppression, colonization, and more started to surface in my interviews. And I was really uncomfortable. And I can tell you, just talking about it right now, my hands are dripping sweat. I am sweating. I don't really sweat, and I'm like sweating. So everything I've learned in this study and over the past 20 years has taught me to face discomfort, to face what's difficult. Everything I've learned. So to run from this would have been silly at best. So I didn't run. And I relied on my tools to navigate the dark. I relied on indigenous scholarship hugely. And I also used my own artistic exploration, particularly poetry, to navigate this area around, particularly around race inequality and my place in it. And so I found my way through it, and if you want to know about it, it's the first chapter of my dissertation. I described the whole journey of what that was like. So, back to Wholehearted Living. One of my favorite movies is Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium. Have you ever seen it? Raise your hand if you saw it. Okay? Not many. It's really good. It's great. It's really good. I know. So Mr. Megorium, I won't get into the story, but Mr. Megorium says in the movie, your life is an occasion, rise to it. Your life is an occasion, rise to it. What does it mean to rise to the occasion of your life? What does it mean to live wholeheartedly? For me, wholehearted living is really about living from wholeness. Like I said before, like winter turns to spring, turns to summer, turns to fall. Like sorrow turns to joy, turns to loneliness, turns to boredom, turns to happiness. There are seasons of our lives. And I found in accepting them and living from that wholeness, I live stronger. I live sturdier, and I feel empowered and connected in my life. So from my conversations with these teachers, like I said, we were talking about the shadow, but we were also talking about what life looks like when you face your shadow. So lots of themes and sub-themes emerged, far too many to talk about in this short time. So I'm going to just focus on a few that I think could be helpful. So I've talked about the power of facing difficulty. And now I want to talk about some of the gifts that rise from facing difficulty. One is resiliency. I love that word, resiliency. And I think of a tree. So when a tree roots deep down into the dark earth and roots deeply down there, it's more likely to weather the storms, right? If it doesn't have its roots deep, it's probably going to blow over. Well, I've found that same thing with myself. When I choose to root down and go within and find my strength, right in here, anytime I can close my eyes, breathe, go right into the dark earth of my body, I find strength there, like I've never found. And believe me, I have looked outside of myself, pretty much everywhere. And I have never found anything like I have found in myself. And the world around me has led me back there, for sure. Teachers, family, friends, community, the landscape itself. But the strength I've found in here, because of all of that, is what has guided me since I was 19 years old. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. So when I find my strength from within, I become a response rather than a reaction to the world. When I root down in this home, and then I start navigating the world, I'm a much clearer response to the world rather than reacting to everything around me. I feel rooted when I go in. I feel stronger. I feel resilient. So resiliency was apparent in every person I spoke with. And it wasn't something they just valued, it's something they cultivated, and they led others to do the same, to really root down, to grow. In fact, Jessica, that's her website, is Root Down and Grow. So, another gift, humility and reverence. Every person I spoke with saw life as sacred. Life was a sacred experience. They really didn't stray far from that understanding. It was really pretty much in their blood. It was in their breath. It was just who they were. There was really no separation from how they saw the sacredness of life. The other thing that really struck me was they knew their place in the world. They really knew their place in the world. They knew where their gifts come from, and they live in service to where their gifts come from. So there wasn't any arrogance. And humility has not been my strongest suit. Let's just say that. So arrogance has been the way my shadow plays out, actually, when I'm not aware of my shadow. So being with these 6 teachers actually helped me learn more about what it means to be humble and to recognize where gifts come from and to bow down to something bigger than myself. They also had a really deep sense of belonging. And knowing where you belong, I think, births reverence. So, another gift, interconnectedness. These people are connected. They are connected to their own root, and then they're connected to the world. And that cycle just keeps going for them and getting bigger and bigger. But what struck me most was it wasn't really, their connection was so deep that it included what they don't like. Their connection was so deep that it included people they don't like or didn't get along with. We all have that. People we're not super resonant with. They still felt connected to these people, and even more importantly, and I think this is why, because they, even though there's parts of themselves that are challenging or maybe they don't like, they still feel like there's value there. Like they're not interested in cutting it off and being disconnected from it. They're interested in welcoming it to better know it. Does that make sense? That connection runs deep. Sometimes it's easy to be connected when we really like something, right? It's fun, it's great. But it takes a deeper understanding of connection, I think, to really welcome what we don't like in healthy ways, of course. So one more theme that emerged that I want to talk about is the power of being able to navigate ambiguity. The power of being able to navigate the unknown. One of the teachers I spoke with talked about the power of the ability, she would say, to hold 2 truths at the same time. To hold 2 truths at the same time. So think about your emotional life, or just think about life in general. Everything that's going on, viewpoints, happenings, feelings, all kinds of things are going on. So it takes a lot of commitment to be able to hold to more than one thing. Many of us feel safe when we say, I'm this. You know, I'm this. But I remember when I was younger, I said, I'm a vegetarian. Like, it felt like, and that was fine, but the more I loosened up and can hold, yeah, I'm a vegetarian, and I understand, Andy, that you need to eat meat. You know, it's like this ability to not hold on to one thing and live from it and identify with it. So I'm still learning, actually, a lot about this. This still feels like a lot of learning for me in this area. So to not live from polarities, but to be able to live in the middle, that was pretty consistent throughout every person I talked to. And they felt like I felt like they were teaching me as I talked to them. And also the word rigor came up around this. So it's rigorous to hang out with the unknown. We know this, right? Raise your hand if you know what I'm saying. It is totally rigorous to hang out with not knowing. So mostly because it can feel like you have nothing to hold on to, right? So these teachers were committed to learning and teaching the tools to navigate the unknown. And I think that's critical in transformation. It's like, I mean, the unknown, ambiguity is part of change and growth. So I felt really grateful to be learning from them as I listened to them really about their ability to do this. So just a few other themes. The importance of self-study. Seeing the importance of studying yourself, looking at yourself, taking time to get to know what your shadow even is, what you're running from. Because, like one of the participants said, when you don't, it will drag you around in your life. It really will. If you don't know it, I know it from my own life. So there are plenty more themes, and I'm gonna move on right now, and I'm gonna close, actually. So the word used most by every person I interviewed was no. K-N-O-W. No. The word that each participant used the most was the word no. So back to Rivka, the dark has its own light. What I discovered was, at least in this study, the light is the knowing. The light is the knowing that comes from going within. So what I learned, and here's where they can't be separated, to listen and be able to hear that knowing, I had to close my eyes and go in my own dark. I had to go into my own darkness to hear the whisper of that knowing. I couldn't have one without the other. So inner knowing is not something I just came up with. Mystics and philosophers have been talking about inner knowing, inner guidance, for centuries. And scholars are actually writing and talking a lot about it today. For me, I had to navigate all that came up in the dark. So when I say dark, it's like we just experienced. I close my eyes and it's dark. So I have to navigate a lot that comes up, like as if I'm in a dark forest. I'm walking through the forest and boom, there comes fear. Boom, there comes joy. The dark isn't any one of those things. The dark isn't fear. The dark isn't grief. It's not joy. The dark is the dark. The dark is the dark. And so to close my eyes and go in, I need the tools to navigate what comes up in the dark. And when I do, I can slowly begin to hear something deeper. But I have quite a lot to navigate on the surface before I get there. So when I turn toward the darkness, this is where I find the most relevant, creative, connected knowing I have ever known. Whether it was when I was 19 years old and heard from within, in the middle of a fraternity party, 19 years old, I heard, Jenny, put the drinks down. Put the drinks down, you will never drink again. And I'm 43, and I haven't had a drink since. It was also when I was laying on a gurney, I was 24 years old, and a surgeon who was an angel in disguise came and whispered in my ear, it is cancer. It's cancer and it's Hodgkin's disease, lymphoma. The minute he said that, I had an experience of the deepest peace I have ever known. More than anything I've ever experienced. That's why my life is devoted to that knowing that shows up differently in each and every one of us. But it is in the dark. It's in the dark of you and in the dark of me. So I think it's really important that we learn tools to navigate the dark, especially when crazy, wild things pop up in the dark. So for those I interviewed, they access this knowing in all kinds of ways. For Carl, it was through poetry. For Melanie, it's through song. For Melissa, it's on the dance floor and many other places. For Lauren, it's walking in the woods. For Manalani, it's in the wisdom of the words of her people. And for Jessica, it's in the study of the fire. For me, there are all kinds of ways to do this, but these days I close my eyes, I put my feet on the ground, and I breathe. And I listen. And I listen, and I listen, and I listen. And every time I hear, Jenny, you are loved, you are safe, and you belong. You belong here. And it's from that place that I become a response to the world. It's in the dark where I hear that. So, the 13th century mystic, Meister Eckhart, says, if the only prayer you ever pray in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough. Oh, I'm probably really going to cry here, you guys, so just be ready. Breathe. You'll have a chance to navigate your darkness right now. I want to thank my family, my mom. We've been through a lot, so for her to be sitting here is such a gift. To my dad, who is no longer with us on the planet, but he's in the stars, and thank you, Dad. He made a lot of this education right here possible for me. To my family of origin, my brother and my sister, and to Andy, and my kids who were to be here today, but my husband was bitten by a brown recluse spider. Talk about navigating my darkness this week. He is at home. He was supposed to be here today. So thank you, countless hours on phones and screens. To my friends who have loved me along the way, especially to Jenny, who drove down here from Colorado to be here. Thank you to the 6 teachers. Melanie, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this. And to all of you, all of the teachers who agreed to be interviewed, I couldn't have done this without you. To my cohort, I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. And you held my hand through this whole thing. Cohort 7, there's some of you that I feel really a deep heart connection with, so thank you. Thank you for being a part of my journey. And to the faculty of Prescott, I see some of you, especially Joan. Thank you so much. Thank you for walking honestly with me through this. And to my beloved committee. Fiery Celeste Snover, you rock. You totally rock and you inspire me. Len, you inspire me. You are like grandfather wisdom to me. And David Greenwood, well, you are Greenwood for sure. You are Green Man. You've all held me to the fire. You've kept me honest, and you've supported me in every way. And most of all, to the light inside the dark, to the light, I would not be who I am without you. Thank you.
Just have a couple of minutes for questions.
Thank you, Jenny. That was very inspiring. I have a question. When you went outside, from looking at the darkness within and looking at the darkness without, and you went out to the aspects of race, and I wanted to ask you a question of, did you find out that human beings are probably the most colorblind people on earth, mostly because they look at, black, somebody that is brown as black, and somebody that is pink as white. And they look at a dog as a dog, whether it's black or white, they don't call them, that. What did you come up with?
Thank you for that question, Feli. I don't know if I can answer it. I don't know if I can answer it yet. I am so at the beginning of that journey. I think I could be colorblind, actually. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm still learning. Thank you for the question. It helps me, actually.
I think we can do one more question. Thank you, Jay.